be.
Yes.
Oh, I know, but it's politicians.
Yeah.
That was part of the goal. Oh. Right. They just it's my actual first president.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
in whatever. It's yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just dropped off so much for longer. Okay.
Board's present. Call to order this meeting of the Actuarial Committee of the Texas Pension Review Board. Ms. Seymour, would you please call the roll of the members?
Chair Keith Greener,
Here.
Marcia Dutch. Here. Stephanie. Here.
Thank you. We are all here. Members, you've received the minutes of the last meeting. Any corrections, changes? I have one, and that pertains to the reference of the LBJ students, and asked clerk to add the word LBJ school, just for clarification. It's a non-substantive change. And if there are hearing no others, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as correct.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Dush, seconded by Ms. Wybe. Any other discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. It's unanimous. Thank you. The minutes are approved as circulated. And now is our opportunity for public comment. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the audience, in person or virtually, that has comments they would like to provide to the committee? Now is your chance to speak to the committee. Going once. Mr. Campbell.
Yes, I was going to speak, and we had to do the telephone government side.
Yes, sir. We have you for item 6 on telephone governance.
Perfect.
So we'll be sure to call you then. Thanks very much. Okay, seeing no one for public comment, the next item on the agenda is the update on the status of the Midland Fireman's Relief Retirement Fund FSRP progress. And I would like to invite representatives on behalf of the City of Midland and the Midland Fire Fund to provide remarks to the committee. Please come and have a seat at the table. And welcome to Austin. Members, you should have material in the back of your book that is submitted by the city and the retirement fund. And I would ask that, I would invite any of you to speak. We can just take it in order as you'd like. I would only ask that you please be sure to speak clearly into the microphone and that you introduce yourself before you speak. So the floor is yours.
So I'm Justin Graham. I'm just the newly elected chair of Midland Firemen's Retirement and Relief. Good morning, esteemed members of the Pension Review Board. I hope to address your concerns about the critical matters concerning our pension fund. So we've undertook great effort in the past few months, and we made quite a bit of progress, I think. So I hope that the packet that found y'all well and addressed some of y'all's concerns. So I think that the documents demonstrate that much has changed at Midland, and we want to emphasize that a lot has changed. We have made quite a bit of progress towards our funding soundness restoration plan, and we're looking forward to getting that in well ahead of the September 2025 deadline. Some of the key points are that our board composition has completely overturned, and so we want to apologize for being late on the March update, because while this is new to the majority of us, so we're learning and we're doing our best and trying to get on top of all of these things that have realistically never been done by Midland in the past. So we're still ironing out some glitches. So in response to the PRB's recommendations in November of 2021, we conducted the forensic audit, and the audit showed us a lot of insufficiencies of our fund and of our governance. And so moving forward, we've been committed to transparency and governance. We've hired a third-party administrator to help guide us in some of these things. So we have also engaged an investment management consultant firm, and we have reestablished our retirement investment portfolio to be more in line with what the standard is. We have terminated asset managers. We've reduced fees by approximately $100,000 annually. Our actuary has explored options presented by the city, and a letter was included in the package to show that the city is also performing a simultaneous actuarial evaluation. And so we plan to move forward with our progress shortly, as soon as we receive those simultaneous actuarial evaluations back. So previously, we had discussed bond options, and that was taken off the table, and then we moved forward, and the city has stated that they have a lump sum that could potentially help us remedy some of our situation. But we're still working through the details of a plan. So in closing, I would like to say that I really appreciate the PRB staff for their guidance and assistance through this whole process. They've been great for us, and we plan to use them in the future to help guide us through this.
Thank you.
Morris Williams Jr. I'm Deputy City Manager for the City of Midland. Good morning, Board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. Ms. Cardona, thank you for your assistance. As Mr. Graham said, you've been a godsend in the communication and getting back and forth. I don't know if you guys have our presentation, or if it's up on the screen or what. I'll just go through this real quick. Some of the things that I'll say is basically what Mr. Graham has already said. It's just an echoing of some of it. If we can hit the next slide. And this is just what we'll cover, where we are, pretty much where we were, and then the steps taken to address the issues that were identified by the board, by the Pension Review Board, and then future steps so we can get in line with the FSRP. We can go to the next slide. Of course, where we were, these are, everybody's pretty aware of that. We had the infinite amortization period. Our ratio was way down. So we know we needed to take steps. The intensive actuary review was conducted by your board, and we knew that that looming date of September 2025 was coming. Next slide. What I'll say from we jump. Oh no, that's fine. I think we're ahead. Let's see. We should be at slide 4.
At this slide 4, I just.
Oh, okay. I don't know what happened to the numbers. Okay, we're fine. All right. The first 2 points, we needed to conduct a forensic audit and then a governance audit. And we got that done within the next year. That came back December 2022. So my point here is we did immediately start working. And as you guys remember, it wasn't a secret. There was it wasn't a good working relationship between the city and the fund for whatever reason, right? But we got to work on that, and we all got in the room and said, we need to get this done. So next slide. Governance definitely was an issue. It just was, people weren't aware, weren't tuned in. It didn't have the heightened awareness for whatever the reasons. And we wanted to take control as far as what can we do on the city side. We need to be more at the table. We need to really address these issues. We need to communicate with your board, as well as we've got a group of firefighters that are really concerned about their benefits. So it became a serious issue for everybody involved, city management as well as city council. Next slide. So the investments, the board took action to address the investment issues. As Mr. Graham said, they took some steps to take care of some of those issues. Investments were a big issue when we came in here, when we first came in here, way back when, a couple of years ago. So next slide. There was a bit of, and I hesitate to use the word, but it fits here. All board members were made aware. City officials were at the table. Council was made aware. So there was a bit of transparency that came out of it. It wasn't just one person leading the show. It was the board talking, our fund talking to the city talking to the fund, and then talking to the firemen and talking to the city council, because it's going to take all those people to make this thing work. And you can go next slide. So we needed to address the FSRP and the changes made based on earlier actuary recommendations. And these are some of the changes that were made, and they were big. The firemen, I went out personally, and along with these guys, we talked to just about every firefighter. I think we covered every firefighter. If not, they were out sick or on vacation. But we covered every firefighter and talked to them face to face about, where the fund was, what we needed to do, some of the things and the pains that it was going to take to do this on both sides. And we informed them when we got through that, and they made a vote to make 2 changes on their side. And then we would later that year institute where we increased our contribution from by 2%, 22 to 24, 22.2 to 24.2. And so those steps were major steps that actuaries had identified that needed to be made. So we took those steps. And then next slide. And then the communication, as I stated earlier, that was a big deal. So we have a city manager as of middle of last year, a new city manager, and that city manager has come in, and that's number 1 priority for our team on the city side to address these issues. Mr. Gonzalez is totally committed to to getting this fund where it needs to be. And I would like to say, you know, from the city side, it's been challenging, to use that word, in working through this process. But where we are now, as far as communication with this board, these board members that we're working with, these fund members, we're in a totally different place than where we were. And that in itself, it can't go unnoticed, because that is a major part of us getting this fund where it needs to be. So the communication that we've had, we went out and had some town halls, talked to employees, talked to firefighters about this, and we answered the hard questions best we could. So, you know, that's all the steps that have been taken to date. Next slide. And then our future steps, like it reads, use actuary guidance to formulate a plan. We have 2 actuaries on this right now, where we're working, we're having them work up, and those reports should come in this month. What we're going to do, this is our plan. We hadn't set dates to it, but this will get done. And I think they would agree with this, that we will sit down with the actuaries from both sides, see what it says, and then start to formulate that plan. From that point, then it's the execution of that plan. Make everybody aware, all the players, you know, city council, the firemen, because they will have to vote if there are changes that need to be made on their side, and then the public. So we don't know what that looks like at this point, but we will have a pretty good picture of that. I'm pretty sure by the end of this month, 1st of June. And that's that. And then to continue to monitor the plan going forward, because I think that's the important part, is it's not just to fix it today and then it's good forever. We have to come back to the table. We have to have that awareness to come back to the table every couple years and keep our eyes on the plan so we don't get in this position. You guys know, of course, you know, we were one of the best, you know, this fund was one of the best performing in the state. So somewhere the awareness was taken off, and we lost focus, or we lost our way somehow. So I think that last step is very important to where we're going. And then I think that's it. The next slide is just our mission. Like I say, I appreciate, I've been in this for the last couple of years. I've been up here to Austin to talk to you guys on a couple of occasions. And I appreciate your diligence and holding us accountable. And it is not something that we take lightly. And I think we have the team with who we have at the city and who we have as board members on this fund. I think we're heading in the right direction.
Mr. Wade, thank you very much. I appreciate the remarks. Is there anybody else that has to pay the remarks? Yeah.
Chad Clark. I'm been a trustee for about a year, but I've been around this plan one way or another since 1992 as a participant in the 90s and early 2000s. But I've been away for about 10 or 11 years. And so when this came to light, and then I found out through the news media, so it became a big shock to me. And I think it, I really didn't. I was caught off guard, as I think you were, and many people were caught off guard. But having been around the city for 30 plus years, I've never seen the spirit of cooperation between the city and the fire department that I see today. And I think that's essential in solving this problem. And I kind of came into this that we're all responsible on some level, and it's going to take us all to fix it. And they've heard me say this numerous times over the last year. And I'm confident in my conversations with the mayor and other city council members that this is being addressed. Everybody wants it to be fixed. And to emphasize, you know, I think the investment consultant Southeastern, they're doing a tremendous job. We reallocated assets that we could. There are, as you're aware, some of the liquid assets that are going to take some time, but we've done a lot of research and talked to those people and trying to get fees reduced on those and other things. And so there's been tremendous progress made from the investment side. the governance side, a lot of progress has been made as well. And hiring Lauderback and Amen as an administrator has been a huge accomplishment too. And I think they're maybe in their third or fourth month. And so that provides some redundancy, and it also provides some expertise that this board hasn't had, that this fund hasn't had. So I just want to give you a vote of confidence in this, having been around it for so long, that things are going in the right direction. As you know, things like this, especially the magnitude, can't be fixed overnight. But tremendous progress has been made. And when I first was agreed to be on this board, I wasn't sure that it could be fixed, looking at the magnitude of it. But now I feel confident we're going in the right direction. We're making progress. And I think you'll see by next year that it will be fixed. And we're not perfect, and we realize that there's been some mistakes made along the way. But I can tell you that everybody that's on this board at the City of Midland and the firefighters are committed to getting it fixed. And so thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Is there anybody else that has remarks you'd like to share with us? Okay. Again, thank you all for coming up here. We really appreciate it. I'm thrilled to see the change that's going on. It's really obvious. Just speaking for myself, frankly, from afar, I've never seen a more dysfunctional situation with regard to the pension fund was in place. It was obviously really bad, and I think that you all probably share that view. Mr. Williams, we really appreciate the city stepping up and helping to fund the audit, forensic review that you all did. I think that's made a big difference in all of this. And I know that you have been leading the effort to bring the city in on this, which is entirely appropriate. The city is a partner in this pension plan. Please pass my appreciation on to Mayor Blong as well for her leadership. I understand that she is really taking this seriously. Just let her know that we appreciate her doing that. Mr. Graham, you stepped into this fund at a time when it was at the bottom. I really appreciate the step. The results that you all are showing are palpable. I'm really surprised, frankly, that things have improved this much this quickly. I seem to be taking all of the right steps, and really appreciate everything that's going on. And I'd ask my fellow committee members if they want to share any remarks.
Thank you.
Ms. Dutch.
Mr. Springer. I first of all want to say I was very impressed by the packet of materials that you put together, Mr. Graham. It is just as Mr. Brainerd said, it's just a night and day difference from where we were just a couple of years ago. I would like to ask Mr. Williams a couple questions. How many firefighters are currently employed at Midland? Do you have a guess?
Yeah, we have the number, but I'm gonna yield to my experts here. What do we have? 220?
220? Do you have plans to grow the department? Is the department increasing, or is it pretty stable?
Well, it's stable, but the growth of the city is going to grow the department, so yeah.
And are you having any problems recruiting firefighters?
We hadn't had as many problems, in my opinion. We hadn't had as many problems as we see. We do pretty good. That's one of the places where we do fairly well, and I think that's a testament to them. They run a good fire department. So we hadn't had the issues. I don't think what you guys.
So as far as the recruiting and retainment, we do have a very high turnover rate in Midland, just like every other department in the state. Fire departments are having trouble on state keeping employees, but so we just recently got fully staffed. It's the first time since 2014 that we've been fully staffed, and it is our recruiting has really upped our game, and so we are now fully staffed, and that's going to also make a big difference on actuarial projections for the future. But we ran even when we were fully staffed on paper, those members were not. We were still hiring back overtime to fill those positions on shift because those members were being trained. So even when we showed on paper that we had the numbers were correct And so we have been fully staffed in the past, but they weren't working on shift so we were still hiring back the overtime, which is part of what was causing some of the
Problems.
issues.
All right, so I'll show you where I'm going with this,
Okay.
because I would like to ask the actuaries, in your latest, but I don't believe we've seen the 23 valuation yet, but after they've approved these changes with, going to the 60-month average, about what is the average normal cost now? It was 30% plus, I believe, in the prior valuation. Did it drop it down to like 25% or
About 27, 28.
27, 28?
28.
All right, so the reason I'm just bringing this up is you do have your firefighters contributing like 14%. And and Midland's contributing going up to 24%, so 38%, but so you've got a fairly decent chunk going to pay off the unfunded, but 27% normal cost. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, David Fee, that's still one of the highest in the state of Texas. So I just caution you, because what concerns me is, again, you need firefighters for the city of Midland. You need to be able to recruit them, but if you ask them to pay too much for their pension, it becomes a problem in recruiting, and so it becomes a circular problem. And so I really think that it's a very complex issue here, but when you talk about benefit reductions, particularly benefit reductions for future employees, keep in mind that you're already taking 14% out of their paychecks, and make sure that future employees are getting a benefit that is something from the city as well. So I just want to caution everybody about how you go forward with contributions and what you're asking members to pay.
Mr. Fee, Mr. Spenlaw, anybody care to remark on that?
Mark Finlaw and Rebecca Morris with Rudd and Wisdom, who provide the actuarial services for the fund. And we are very much opposed to tiers or lowering benefits for future hires. We have never studied that. And so far the board has been supportive of that. So we're very thankful for that. So we're looking at something that's going to have more of an impact, more painful, but more of an impact, getting unfunded liability down and the normal costs down. And it's an opportunity also to improve the benefit formula. Right now, it's very generous for the first 20 years and increasingly not very good for above 20 years. And we're proposing a change, be studied, that would lower the benefits somewhat for the first 20 years and increase the benefit for the years above 20.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that sounds really good. But do you vest after 20 years? Do you have 20-year vesting in this plan, or what is it 10-year vesting?
It's
10-year
10-year partial,
Yeah.
and then full 20-year full vest.
Thank you, Mr. Spenlaw. Does anybody else care to share any remarks with the board, the committee? If not, may I ask those of you who did not speak to just introduce yourselves for the record, please? Yeah.
Christy Weekland, I'm the Director of Finance and a trustee member.
Thank you.
Eric Stewart, active member, just started in January.
You're a firefighter?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service.
Matt Marshall, last year.
Thank you also. Ms. Labby, any questions?
I do have a question, kind of looking forward. So I understand the FSRP is due for 2025. Do you all anticipate that that's when it'll be provided to the board, or do you think we'll get it sooner than that?
We have full intention of providing it sooner, but working through these steps, obviously there's a lot of things that are out of our control as as the pension board. So, like they stated previously, getting council on board and getting all of this plan put together and then implemented. Our time constraints are there, but we have full intention to get something together before then.
Yeah, I would agree with that. From the city side, we're anticipating whatever we need to do on our side to get there. We will be doing as well. And it's, it's a different ball game since we're working together. We both anticipate that it should be soon.
Okay. I think the only kind of ask that I have is, to the extent that it takes longer than anticipated. I definitely appreciate all the work that you guys have done to date. I appreciate you all coming today. I understand the time commitment that's involved in traveling to Austin to appear before us. But if this does continue to drag out for, maybe longer than anticipated, I'd like you all to come back and provide us with another update as we move through. I mean, just looking back at the history of this and how long this problem has been going on, I do think that if it's going to take longer than maybe what's currently anticipated for us to have the FSRP, I'd appreciate, and it doesn't have to be all of you, it can be a smaller contingent, but I'd appreciate another check-in.
Yes, ma'am.
We appreciate hearing that you've been working closely with the PRB staff. Obviously, feel free to continue to do that. By that. And once again, we really appreciate everything that's going on. We appreciate your efforts. Is there anything else anybody would like to say right now? Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming out.
Yes, thank you all.
Next item on the agenda is item 6, Tougher Governance Project. And we have Ms. Miller of the PRB staff scheduled to speak, but I'd like to give Mr. Campbell an opportunity. Mr. Campbell, would you like to take your opportunity to share your remarks on this before we get into it?
Sure.
And, please have a seat and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Chuck Campbell, Jackson Walker. I am a public pension plan attorney. I'm head of the Employee Benefits and Executive Compensation Group at Jackson Walker. I've been working with Telfer plans for, I guess, about 20 years now as a public pension fund. I also serve on the Fiduciary and Governance Committee of the National Association of Public Pension Attorneys. When I had to check the box in terms of whether I was for, against, or undecided, I checked observer, and I wish I could have filled in passionate observer. I am Telfer plans are my family. I've been working with them for 20 years, and I'm lucky to call a lot of them my clients. I'm not here on behalf of any one client. I'm here just on behalf of them generally, in terms of the comments that were requested generally with respect to the governance pieces that were involved with Telfer plans. Certainly in my experience, I'm not going to a blind eye that there's not governance issues that have arisen with certain Telfer plans along the way. I think certainly I don't believe that's not the only reason some plans are at issue. I mean, obviously public pension plans across the country, large cities, states, smaller, have had issues in the last 25 years with respect to the funding of their public pension plans. And yes, maybe some are governance, but some are just generally structured. I think the fixed rate plan structure of Telfer plans has been a challenge, certainly, and other aspects of it generally. But from a governance perspective, like I said, it's not that it's always perfect, but I do think that there is a thought out structure in place now. And not that there's not room for a little improvement, but it's not one that's inoperable. I think, as Mr. Williams from Midland pointed out in his presentation, not to take lightly of the governance changes from participation and engagement perspective that's happened in Midland. recently, and how that's help address the issue of their plan. And in my view, that's right. And when I see Telfer plans work right and the governance work right, it's not necessarily how it's structured, it's really the engagement. And so, I mean, the 3 points kind of globally of the letter I provided and my general thoughts on things, really it's participation and not composition of boards that's the key. You can change the composition any form or fashion, and frankly, that's a settler plan sponsor. That's the legislature's decision if they want to change the composition of the board. But you can change the composition all you want if you don't have participation, particularly participation of plan sponsor members. You're not going to fix the issue. And in looking at my boards that I've worked with, and generally the plans that have strong participation by the plan sponsor, successfully run, frankly. Not to say they don't have issues or have problems, but the city's aware of them and addresses them, particularly when a mayor or a finance director is involved. If they see something that they have questions about, they're going to take it back to the mayor, whomever it might be, and there's going to be a lot more focus on the fund. And I've seen it work very, very well with the current makeup right now. Other instances, if a plan sponsor doesn't show up, particularly plan sponsor representatives, they may have a citizen designee that shows up or otherwise, but if it's not somebody from the city there kind of representing or just kind of really just taking feedback and engaged from the city, it can be a problem. I think to me, that's the key, is that engagement. The second big topic is really oversight and not control in terms of some of the proposals out there. Certainly more engagement by the plan sponsor and oversight by the plan sponsor is a good thing. And you've seen it in some of the pension reform for both Houston plans and some of the Austin plans. There is mechanisms, particularly with the ADEC model that they put in there with the corridor. That there's a process where those cities are engaged in that process and provided notice of that process and can respond. But from both a constitutional duty, a legal duty, and a fiduciary duty, kind of the ultimate players and decision makers are still the board. They do have that fiduciary duty. When you put decisions in the city's lap for approval or whatever it might be, unfortunately, politics does come in play. And I know there's some pretty highlight cases, frankly, with larger cities across the country where that politics coming into play did cause significant issues with respect to funds. It wasn't with the best interest of members. It might have been the best interest of what was going on at the time. Frankly, the public pension plans becoming political footballs is a national issue now, frankly, whether it's red or blue. And I hate for other plans that could somehow seep into what's going on here. And then my final big picture point is really guardrails and objectives as opposed to strict requirements. You have 50 plus cities involved here of different sizes too, significant sizes ranging from the Irving's, Corpus Christi's, and Lubbock's to the Lufkin's, right? And there's a broad range in terms of what those cities are, the makeup of whom they have. But kind of a one-size-fits-all requirement on these plans is not needed. Yes, guardrails, principles are fine. And frankly, what the PRB's put out and just its objectives, whether it's actuarial funding objectives and otherwise, really are taken part, in my observation, by all plans. But when strict requirements, statutory and otherwise, come into play, you run a risk of having situations that just don't necessarily fit. For example, a benefit improvement policy, I think, is a great thing. Under TELFRA, actuaries do have to approve any changes in benefits under Section 7 of that act. And most actuaries have a plan or a process of what they consider in making those changes. And I think a lot of funding policies have those as well. But having objectives for that as opposed to strict requirements, to me, will avoid some potential kind of harsh consequences. But that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions now, or if you get into it, I'm always happy to be a resource as well in terms of any questions that you have on specific topics.
Mr. Campbell, thank you. We appreciate the comments that you've submitted in response to the PRB's request for comments on this. They're all very helpful. And we also appreciate your fiduciary service and you taking the time to come out and speak with us today. And good to know you'll be in the room while we have the discussion. Thanks very much. Now I'd like to ask Ms. Miller to come and provide her presentation. Welcome, Ms. Miller.
Good morning, members. My name is Mariah Miller, and I'm the Policy and Communications Manager for the PRB. During the last Actuarial Committee meeting, we introduced the Telfer Governance Project, discussed potential governance issues, and recommendations document. That document was then released for public comment between February 12th and March 29th. We received a total of 7 comments during that time period. Most of them were from systems, but we did receive 1 from a city, 1 from a law firm, and then 1 that was submitted from a couple of trustees on their own behalf, so not on behalf of the systems, as them acting in their individual capacity. Last Friday, we were invited to attend and speak about the potential governance issues and recommendations document at the Telfer Peer Review. Telfer Peer Review is a training conference that discusses various issues related to Telfer funds, and it also provides MET CE credit. We really appreciate the invitation, and we felt that we had a really good discussion with the trustees that were present, both during the forum and just during the conference as well. We held an open discussion, which was primarily focused on the potential legislative recommendations rather than on the guidance and CE proposals. The sentiment was pretty similar to what we received in comments in terms of which recommendations caused the most concern among the stakeholders. And we will get into that a little bit more in a minute, but we did spend most of our time discussing those recommendations under funding and decision-making practices, as well as the board and contribution structure specifically. So we're going to go through some of the feedback we received, as well as discuss the new options that the committee may want to consider as we move forward with recommendations, particularly the legislative recommendations. In your committee packet, you will find a summary of the feedback, which is sorted by topic area. It includes the original issue, all the original recommendations, and any proposed changes we have based on feedback we received. The complete comments were also provided to you as an attachment ahead of time. And we will be releasing another draft of the potential issues and recommendation documents following this meeting. Okay, next please. So that brings us to our overall feedback. We received a lot of very thoughtful responses and feedback. Many commenters provided alternative options to the ones that we originally suggested. And we did find that really helpful, and we used that to develop additional options that we are going to discuss today. Not every comment touched on each topic area, which is why on this chart, you'll see the in favor and against numbers vary from item to item. The legislative recommendations in general were met with a little bit more concern than the guidance and CE recommendations. So this presentation is going to predominantly focus on those. And since the guidance and CE recommendations were met pretty favorably, we are not proposing any changes to those at this time. Next slide, please. On this slide, I wanted to briefly call attention to topic area 4, item 4.1. That item did not carry a specific recommendation, so we don't really have a gauge for general approval here, but we did receive some potential options, which we will discuss later in a moment. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. As a review, topic area 1 covered system funding and decision-making practices. Telfer systems must adhere to certain operational and funding guidelines set in statute, including minimum contribution rates and a predetermined board structure. While sponsoring entities control their employer contribution levels, typically through the city budgeting process, changes to benefit and member contributions occurred through board-initiated action rather than statutory change or a change to city charter. Prior to a benefit or a contribution change being finalized, the changes must be first approved by a system's actuary and then by a majority vote of participating members of the system. During our research, we identified that the Telfer statutory decision-making processes may sometimes hinder progress towards resolving funding issues faced by Telfer systems. Under this item, we originally had 3 recommendations. The first one is a legislative recommendation or a potential legislative recommendation, and that's item 1.1 of the document. It read 1.1, requiring the sponsoring entity to first approve any ballot options concerning the benefit or contribution changes prior to a member vote. This recommendation would ensure sponsors and systems work together collaboratively on potential changes before going to a member vote, and it could change the incentive structure to make it more likely that sponsors would be less hesitant to provide necessary employer contributions. We did receive a lot of concern on this topic, both in comments and also during the Telfer peer review. A common theme that was brought up was that all board members are fiduciaries first and foremost, and they have an obligation to act in the benefit of the fund. That theme comes up later amongst other comments as well, particularly in response to board composition. There was also concern that requiring sponsors to pre-approve ballot options may politicize the process. We received an alternative suggestion that sponsors and systems could have a joint develop, review, and concur partnership when developing the ballot options. We used this suggestion to create alternative option 1.1a, which now reads, sponsors receive notice of plan changes with time to provide comments preceding a member vote. Any comments would be made publicly available to members before a vote. We also received some positive feedback on the guidance and CE proposals under item 1. As I said before, we don't really have any changes to the guidance and CE, but as a refresher, those recommendations were 1.2. The PRB may publish guidance based on the experience of multiple Telfer systems for improving overall plan governance. In item 1.3, the PRB may create a continuing education course on successful system reforms, potentially featuring a panel of Telfer stakeholders. So I am going to pause here to allow the committee to discuss the new option 1.1a.
Members, do you want to proceed item by item like this, or would you rather hear all of them and then pick them up?
I think this item is so important that we need to discuss it directly.
Okay, you okay with that, Ms. Lyman? Okay. We're going to take up topic area 1, as shown on the screen. Are there comments or questions for Ms. Miller, or statements and comments you'd like to make in general?
I would like to make a statement. I view this as being the most important recommendation as part of this study. I mean, Chair Brainerd, please correct me if I'm wrong. You know, the reason we're taking on this study is because while not all of the Telfer plans were in financial distress, many of them were. Whenever I would look at the list of who's requiring an FSRP or who is at risk for an FSRP, the majority of the plans were Telfer plans. So there's something dramatically wrong with what was happening. Now we're seeing some positive move forward after many years of trying, but there's still, I think, a fundamental problem with Telfra in that there isn't enough coordination between the trust and the sponsoring organization. And so I just, I can see from, as long as the trust is able to recommend benefit changes and get them approved by members, that is going to be a problem for the sponsoring organizations to agree to an actuarial contribution, an actuarially determined contribution. And you can say, well, and since I've been on this board, very few times have plans gone for plan improvements. A lot of times they've gone for benefit reductions. And yet the member contributions have stayed the same. And you've heard me say this over and over again. I'm very concerned about the fact that future members are paying the same level of contributions as current members for a much lower benefit. And sometimes paying, their contributions are in excess of what their benefit normal costs would be. So I have a problem with not having more direct discussion between a sponsor and the trust before a member vote comes to be. Now, on the other hand, I will also say, I think the member's voice is extremely important because so many of them are contributing 10, 12, 14% or more of pay. to these plans. They certainly deserve a voice. But I also think the sponsor has to have an equal voice. And so I'm concerned that moving to 1A, 1.1A isn't really dealing with the problem we've got here. And I'm willing to be corrected if others feel differently.
Thank you, Ms. Dush. Before we go to other comments, I should clarify something for everybody. And that is what we're talking about here are proposed possible statutory changes. So what would the process that this would take, that I think Mariah is going to articulate here for a bit, is that we're a committee and whatever recommendations we approve are recommendations to the full pension. Pension Review Board will take that up at its upcoming next meeting, whatever recommendations we approve. And those will take the form, correct me if I'm wrong, please. We're not voting today. Okay, I should have known that, sorry. We're gonna have a robust discussion today. These will be statutory changes, though, potentially, that the Pension Review Board makes to the legislature as part of our legislative. We'll be sending this back out for comments after the Pension Review Board sees. So thank you. Comments on item 1, Ms. Dush? Ms. Lyman?
I think as it relates to this item, in some ways, I sit on the fence, right? I share the same concerns that Marcia has about ensuring the necessary collaboration on a moving forward basis. But I also don't want to shift the power so much that we're in essence giving the city a veto power. And I think we need to be sensitive to that. I'm not sure if the new option quite goes far enough. I'm still thinking of what we could propose that would fall somewhere in the middle. But that's kind of my personal thoughts on it.
Thank you, Ms. Lyman. I wholeheartedly agree with Ms. Dush's comments, especially that this is an issue of major importance. In fact, I agree so strongly that I prepared some remarks on this issue. I think this is a meta issue. This is much bigger than the competition. I appreciate what Mr. Campbell said about participation, not competition. On composition, I think you're spot on with that. Participation is much more important than composition. But this issue really trumps all. Two concerns I have regarding the authority the Telfer plan participants have to vote for higher benefits, lower employee contributions. First, is this the conflict of interest? I'm aware of no other instance in the nation in which pension plan participants are permitted to vote themselves a benefit enhancement or reduce their required contribution. Before issuing bonds, which create a fiscal obligation on taxpayers, cities, counties, and school districts in the state of Texas, those bonds must receive taxpayer approval. Increasing pension benefits has the same effect. It creates a long-term obligation for current and future taxpayers. Taxpayers, through their elected representatives, should have the right to consent to committing themselves, future taxpayers, to future obligations. Second issue is the effect that this authority to change benefits and contribution rates has on the pension boards. Telfer boards and plan participants may approve higher benefits only if the actuary signs off on the change. An actuary is less likely to sign off on such a change if the plan's funding condition fails to meet certain actuarial thresholds. As a result, having the authority to increase one's own benefits creates an incentive to avoid making hard decisions regarding actuarial assumptions, resulting in plans appearing to be in better shape than they actually are. As a group, as Ms. Dush said, compared to other public pension plans in Texas, Telfer plans have higher expected investment return assumptions, higher payroll growth assumptions. Yet even with those, they also have longer amortization periods and lower funding ratios. I'm not certain of this, but I'm willing to bet that they also have higher employee contribution rates. In my view, the authority to vote in favor of higher benefits or lower employee contributions creates an implicit incentive to make the plan's actuarial condition appear better than it actually is. The result is that we are not seeing the true condition of these plans, nor their actual costs being presented or paid. That to me is the real danger of an arrangement in which plan participants may vote to increase benefits or reduce the contributions they pay. Those are my views on this issue. And that is not to question anybody's intentions or integrity or anything like that. I just think it's a fundamental governance issue that plan participants should not be legally authorized to adjust their own benefits at the cost of taxpayers.
Now,
But is that at the end of the day, is that a governance issue or is that an actuary issue? Because to me, it seems like the actuary should provide that necessary check and balance associated with it. And the problem really arises if the actuary is not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
My view is that this standard, this law, and that expectation is putting the actuary in an untenable position. All eyes become on the actuary. There's a lot of pressure being put on an actuary like this. It's unfair, I think, and it's inappropriate. The actuary in this case is actually serving as a proxy for taxpayers. The actuary is playing the role of signing off on future long-term obligations. And I've been around here long enough to see, and I've got all the respect in the world for actuaries. Many of them are my friends. I have the highest regard for them. But not every actuary is able and willing to hold up under these circumstances. And it wasn't that long ago where we had an actuary who admitted publicly to failing to abide by actuarial professional standards in order to accommodate his public pension clients. And I don't think that it's appropriate for a single individual to be placed in that position to sign off on this as a proxy for really where the consent ought to be, which is with taxpayers. Other comments, suggestions on topic area 1?
I just go back to if I'm the municipality and I'm being asked to provide an agreement to either increase our contributions or provide an actuarially determined contributions. From my point of view, there would be a risk that I cannot control the benefits or have input into the benefits. And again, there haven't been a lot of benefit increases since I've been around, with the low interest rates in the economy that we've had. But the fact is, why would I would like to have some control. Now, we've also seen that some systems have established that control by having side agreements. And correct me if I'm wrong, which is it? Is it Irving?
So a couple of examples would be Irving Fire,
Longview Fire.
so they were associated with pension obligation bond packages, so they made agreements that deal with some of the.
Right, so there could be a situation where in order to, either fund the plan with a pension obligation bond or increase contributions, there are side agreements that say, the benefits cannot be increased under these conditions. But again, I just think, we've got 2 plans that have gone that direction. I just think there needs to be more incentive so that the sponsors are much more willing to work with the trustees to accomplish full funding.
Okay, I think we've all said our piece on that. Let's move on to topic area 2, Ms. Miller.
Thank you. So topic area 2 focuses on board structure and membership. Helper boards are comprised of 7 members. The mayor of a municipality or the mayor's designated representative, the chief financial officer of the municipality, or the person who performs the functions of the CFO, or the CFO's designated representative. 3 members of the retirement system elected by participating members, and then 2 residents of the state who are not officers or employees of the municipality, and those are also elected by participating members. We have found that there are some Telfer systems that are struggling to fill their citizen seats, and there is no guidance for systems regarding what qualifications they should look for when trying to fill those seats. Moreover, filling citizen seats with individuals with relevant and helpful expertise, such as financial or legal expertise, can be difficult, especially for smaller Telfer systems. Outside of Telfra, recent legislative reforms for some of the municipal public pension systems have resulted in shifting balance towards having more equal representation from the sponsoring entity and also adding some additional required qualifications for certain trustees. So that brings us to the first issue we identified in this area. The Telfer board structure may need some updates to address the identified concerns and ensure balanced representation. We proposed in the original document that, as a legislative recommendation, changes could be considered to the Telfer board structure, such as eliminating one citizen seat, adding one city appointee seat. This was intended to be a starting point for discussion, and we did receive a lot of feedback on this suggestion. Generally, there was some concern raised that this could potentially lead to the elimination of very productive and engaged trustees. There was also the concern that new appointees from the city may also not carry financial or investment backgrounds when they also could be used as a political quiz. From the feedback, we now have 3 new options for the committee to consider. These options came from feedback from stakeholders, and we wanted to pass them along to you as a committee for discussion. So we now have 2.1A, which is statutory authority for boards to adopt policy to modify structure when citizen seats cannot be filled. 2.1B, increasing the total number of board seats to have 3 active members, 3 sponsor representative, and 3 citizen seat positions. So that would bring the total board up to 9 positions. And 2.1C, prohibiting retired system members from filling citizen seats. I am going to pause here for a moment in case the committee wants to discuss.
Okay, members, you've heard Mariah's explanation of topic area 2. Is there discussion?
I would make the following comments. If we're already seeing that there are problems in filling citizen seats, 2.1B does not seem to be a good option to me. I also, kind of concur that, if a municipality has the ability, or if the trust has the ability to fill the 2 citizen seats, that's great. But when they don't, I guess I might be more of in favor of, if they can't fill the citizen seat, one of the citizen seats, that maybe then the city gets the 3rd seat. As I've kind of articulated before, I'm for like equal voice between the members and the city. But I'm not so far to say that it must be a 3 seat for the city. So I guess I would kind of equivocate on that. And again, prohibiting the retired system members from filling citizen seats. It's my understanding that sometimes those are the only citizens they can get to fill the seats. So I'd be interested in other committee members and on their voice on that. I mean, to me, that person does have a kind of a conflict of interest, but yet is also has an interest. So I don't know how I feel about that.
Thank you, Ms. Dush. Ms. Libby, you have comments on this board composition issue?
I think I have concerns about retired members filling citizen seats. To me, that shifts too much power on the board to the participants. I think I'm probably indifferent between 2.1A and 2.1B. I think either of them could be workable. I mean, I understand that, I think we've heard, right? Some boards have problems filling citizen seats, but not all of them do. And so you know, there are instances in which 2.1B could be helpful. So I don't know if I necessarily feel more strongly for one proposal over the other.
Well, if they have problems filling the seats,
But not all of them have
No,
problems filling seats.
but 2.1B says now instead of 2 citizen seats, we have 3. So you'd just be increasing the problem with B.
For those that have the problem,
Right.
you would, but for those that don't, you could be enhancing participation or enrollment. I mean, I don't know if we have a breakdown between what percentage have problems filling and what percentage don't, or, you know. But I just, you know, I think either of them is possible.
Thank you. I wonder to what extent some of this might be ameliorated by allowing either a retiree or an active member to serve on the board. I certainly agree that a retiree should not be allowed to serve a citizen seat if the person has a particular interest. 9 is too big for these size funds. We don't need 9 people, especially when we're having such trouble getting 7 people in certain cases. And just one other remark that strikes me about this, and that is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the citizen seats can be a resident of the state of Texas. Is that right? So you could be serving on the Lufkin board, for example, and you could be from Brownsville or El Paso or anywhere, which strikes me as really as passing strange. These boards are local boards intended to serve local groups, and to bring somebody from so far away, to me, sort of flies in the face of local representation, local control.
But wasn't that change made because of the concern about trying to fill citizen seats? I mean, wasn't that already a recognized problem?
I don't know. Is that right? I'm getting nothing, nods from people whose opinion I know and respect. So apparently that is the case.
Sorry, I mean, we're like making eye contact, trying to decide who was gonna mention. But yes, because there are some, especially with the smaller towns and smaller funds, finding somebody within city limits can be a problem. That is our understanding, at least of the origin of this expanding to Texas, is that way somebody who's maybe from outside the city limits can still participate, especially since finding somebody with a background in finance or investments can be difficult. This was a way of trying to expand that potential pool for those who needed assistance there.
So who's choosing that person? Who's choosing the citizen person?
So right now there's not any like formalized guidance here. So each fund kind of has a slightly different procedure is what we've heard. So in general, the participating members has to elect that position onto the seat, but actually trying to find like qualified individuals or individuals in general to fill that. Sometimes they come as recommendations from outgoing board members, and sometimes they come from just doing kind of like a call isn't the right word for it, but a general search. Since each system sort of has their own process here, when we were in the work group, one of the things that we found was that there is not a lot of overlap necessarily between how this is handled, and it is sort of handled on a pretty dramatically varying basis between systems, be it recommendation or trying to find somebody from a like call.
That's interesting. I did not realize that. So statute says citizen board members, but it doesn't say how those board members get on board.
Correct. Beyond the election by the committee members.
So say that again, please. What did you just say?
So beyond election by participating members. So that's how they get on there.
The plan or electing those people.
The board members, apologies.
The other 5 board members.
Board members.
5 board members. Yeah, I have a big problem with that. I mean, the idea of a governing board is to govern independently. And when the board itself is picking its own members, to me, that's the fundamentally flies in the face of what a board is supposed to be about. Who is a board going to pick? They're going to go out and pick people who are going to go along with what they want. I think it's nonsensical, and I think it's that's a bad governance issue in my opinion. That's not who. I mean, what
But
kind of
that's a common governance issue, right? Whether it's
boards
that
picking themselves
or,
members?
well, I mean, boards picking themselves, or, I mean, if you look at the, you know, an example of a city county or a county commissioner's court and different boards that they compose of, I mean, they put out a call to citizens for citizens to apply to these committees, and then from those applications, people were selected and they're voted on by the whole board. I mean, in some ways, this is not very much different than that.
But those are committees. It's not they're not electing the board themselves.
They're not governing boards. And particularly with the ramifications of item 1 that we just finished talking about, where these individuals have the authority to basically obligate citizens for over the long term for pension obligations. I think it's a fundamental flaw, and I'm going to suggest that the full pension review board suggest a change that clarifies how these people get on the board and removes the authority of the board to select from among its own. I mean, what board is going to pick anybody? They know disagrees with their worldview. Sir, did you want to say something?
No, I'm just, and we do.
You
Go out and look for people that necessarily disagree with us, but we have had many citizens spots on our board that didn't necessarily automatically agree with the firefighters for the city. They were there on their own volition, made their own decision, had their own input and education and experience. I can tell you, as a Telford board member, my 10 years on our board, we have not once gone out and cherry picked a citizen member. We had outgoing members give us a list of people that might be interested in coming in, but we have never once asked them their thoughts or beliefs on something that may come up eventually.
Okay, I appreciate
happy to fill the spot.
I appreciate you sharing it. Can you please introduce yourself?
Ben Martz, Odessa firefighters.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
I mean, maybe for this issue and going back to the first issue, I mean, is some of this maybe alleviated, you know, and it's like in the first instance, instead of city consent, or the second instance in which you have the board selecting these citizen members. I mean, could some of the concerns be alleviated through having super majority voting requirements for the board, such that, you know, a simple majority of the board wouldn't be necessary for either plan changes or citizen appointees, but some type of super majority is required?
Yeah, I think that's a great.
That's a really interesting idea,
Because
because if you get two city, 3 members, you know, to have a super majority of at least 4. Well, I would say you'd have to have at least 4 members vote to agree to the citizen members or something like that.
Okay, well, staff is making a note of all of this, and we'll be considering this later on with the full board. Anything else on item 2? Topic area 2.
I do have a little bit more on topic area 2 in general.
I'm sorry.
2.1. I actually kind of on that note am going to jump a little bit ahead for a moment. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we're primarily focusing on the legislative recommendations, since that's where we received the most feedback and alternative options. But I did want to say that option 2.3 was a recommendation for the creation of guidance. And that guidance was specifically going to be on the processes for identifying citizen trustees. And that one was generally met favorably, and we have no changes to our recommendations. So it is just guidance. It's not a legislative recommendation, but I did want to note that.
Thank you.
We were hoping to move forward a little bit there.
Thank you.
So backing up a little bit. Another issue that was identified under topic 2 was that some boards may have chronically disengaged board members, by which we mean board members who are frequently missing meetings, or non-compliant board members who are not completing their education requirements. At this time, there's no statutory mechanism that gives boards the authority or the ability to address these concerns. However, there are some systems who have been able to adopt both education and or attendance policies and use them. So our original legislative recommendation here already had a few options to consider. So the recommendation was 2.2, provide statutory authorization for the removal of disengaged / non-compliant board members, such as authorizing each board to adopt a policy for removing inactive or non-compliant board members, including language allowing for appointed trustees to be removed by the mayor or elected trustees to be removed by members in accordance with procedures adopted by the board. And then also formalizing in statute that absences beyond a certain percentage of meetings or number of meetings is cause for removal. This would also just be a certain number of consecutive meetings. So we did receive some feedback here about the potential objectivity of a removal mechanism authorized by boards. So we did add a more concrete option for consideration as well, which does have a basis in the attendance requirement for other governmental boards. So the new option under 2.2 in general is specifying that absences beyond 50% of meetings is cause for removal unless formally excused by the board. However, I do also want to note that there was some concern raised about having specific minimum attendance rates formalized in statute, which is why we did include that clause of the formal excuses being permitted. So we also received a suggestion clarifying that the mayoral designee specifically be from city council. So we added that as an alternative option for 2.2a. This would allow for some parity to be maintained by having representation from elected officials still on the board, even in the event if the mayor is unable to act as a trustee. We've also
You would restrict his or her ability to delegate to strictly to somebody from city council.
Yes. So as I already mentioned, because I did jump around a little bit, those are all of the legislative recommendations we have under this section. And then we did have 2.3, which was the guidance recommendation for creating guidance for the citizens and trustees. So before moving any further, I'm going to pause again for committee discussion.
Thank you. Thoughts on removal of board members? The board's ability to remove board members?
On 2.2 new, I would just say absence beyond 50% of meetings, but within what period of time? Within a year, within 2 years?
We didn't specify, but I think when we were discussing it, we were talking about fiscal years. And that's something we can update the option to be more specific and say within given fiscal year.
Thank you, that would be helpful. Personally, I like the idea of requiring a minimum meeting attendance threshold. I think 50% is way low. I would suggest something like 2/3 or 3/4.
How often do the boards typically meet? I mean, I would presume that they meet at least quarterly.
I believe it's monthly.
Monthly.
And our board members, do they have the same ability as we do to participate via Zoom or electronically?
My understanding is maybe wrong. So
that's governed by the act, just like for this board. So
Where would have to be present?
I think those inclusions apply. Is that correct?
Chuck is saying yes. Thank you, that's helpful. You deal with a lot of boards. You see Zoom,
The forum has to be present at the physical location. Board members participate by Zoom. They can see their face.
A quorum must be present in physical form,
Yes.
and other board members can appear virtually. That's interesting. Thank you.
So again, I think with knowing that people could participate electronically, I would probably go with you, Chair, that maybe 2/3 and 3/4 would be a reasonable requirement.
Okay. You okay with that, Ms. Lighting? Up in the threshold?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so much concerned about the threshold. I'm a little bit concerned about the board formally excusing absences. But maybe that ultimately depends on where we set the.
Can you elaborate on your concern about excusing absences?
I just feel like, what if there's not parity associated with what absences are excused for what members?
I see. Right, so it could be treated arbitrarily.
It could be treated arbitrarily based on the member that's absent. And I definitely feel like, I mean, if we're at the 50% threshold, you know, I would not be in favor of any excused absences, because if, you know, you can't, I mean, we all have things that come up in life, but if your life becomes so busy that you can't fulfill this obligation to the board, then it's probably time to step aside and let someone else take that seat.
50% is pretty low.
I think, yeah, if we increase the percentage, you know, to 75% or something else, I'm probably more open to some type of excused absence, but I do have concerns about it.
I agree with that.
On the other hand, I think there are always opportunities for, you know, essentially discrimination is what you're saying. Some people would be excused for any reason, or some people for only a very specific reason. But I mean, there could always be somebody. Don't we have to? I think I would trust that the people who are managing this money and running these funds would do an equitable job of excusing absences. I think that's something that we can trust to the boards.
I just go back that if we stay with 50%, I would not be in favor of excused absences. The higher that percentage goes, I'm more open to it.
Yeah,
I agree.
Okay, thank you. 2.2a includes statutory language allowing the mayor to appoint the designated city council if the mayor determines they are unable to participate. I really like that. I think it's common for pension boards to designate some ex officio member or that person's designated. I think it's entirely likely that we'll find on a lot of city councils somebody who has a greater interest in serving on the board than the mayor does and might have more expertise. And I think we ought to liberate the mayor to do that.
Well, except right now at Midland, isn't Mr. Williams the mayor's? Are you the mayor's designee?
No, the mayor is actually on the board. I do not sit on.
Would you like to?
I know that.
Some days.
Anything else to say about allowing the mayor to designate a member of the city council?
I like 2.2a.
Yeah, you too, Ms. Dush.
Well, it's restricting the mayor's abilities to pick who represents the city.
Sorry, what is the current mayor's authority?
So currently, the mayor is able to designate a representative. It does not specify where the representatives come from. So the mayor's representative. So this would, as Ms. Dush is saying, require it to be specifically from the city council pool.
Well, that seems wholly appropriate to me. The mayor is part of the governing body, and it seems like a governing body ought to be represented. So I like that kind of restriction, as opposed to just going out and getting a citizen. The mayor knows somebody out in the community. I mean, that's one thing, but the purpose, presumably the purpose behind the statute is to have the governing body represented on the pension board.
But let's say, for example, in Midland, if the mayor wasn't able to participate and he wanted to designate the deputy mayor, you know, then he couldn't do that because he'd have to be, you know, designating somebody from city council.
So we can say a mayor, can we say a mayor, the mayor or city council member or a member of the city staff?
I would go with that, but
That way the governing body is continuing to be represented.
Who's the second city representative? Is the mayor plus?
The chief
CFO?
financial officer or somebody acting in that capacity, or the CFO says.
Okay, let's ask staff to document all of this and come back to us with some suggestions. On from 2.2. All right.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Lindsay. Thank you. So our third topic area is transparency and communication. During our research, we found that there are sometimes instances where information is not easily accessible by all parties, including sponsoring entity and membership. Sometimes minutes and board meeting materials are not complete or comprehensive on the website. Sometimes they can just be difficult to locate on the website. It is a requirement that all reports submitted to the PRB are also posted online as well. However, it can be difficult for smaller funds to maintain a website on their own, and outsourcing this to a third party can get expensive very quickly. We are proposing a legislative recommendation to require the sponsoring entity of a Telfer system to make publicly available on their website reports submitted to the PRB by the system. This change would facilitate access to information about Telfer systems, even in situations where the system is unable to maintain an independent website. Also, as a note, this is something that many sponsors already do. Even when the system has their own website, sometimes there is overlap with sponsors also including information on their site. We did receive positive feedback on the suggestion, so we do not have any changes to the recommendation at this time. We also proposed creating guidance or continuing education on transparency and communication topics, and we have no changes to that suggestion either. So that moves us to topic area 4, which was broadly additional areas for research and consideration. During the work group meetings, we were made aware that statutory language is potentially outdated in some areas and may not reflect current practices. We received a few different comments under this item for potential updates to various components of the Telfer statute, but at this time, we are only proposing a new option of authorizing boards to adopt an education policy. This education policy can include requirements such as requiring trustees to finish their training prior to participating in their first board meeting, or it may have more stringent education requirements in terms of how many, the number of hours of continuing education a trustee must complete in a given fiscal year. As I mentioned earlier, there are some systems who have already adopted education policies, and in those policies, we do see some systems having substantially larger amounts of education required than the current MET program does, which, as a refresher, the MET program requires 7 years of core training during a trustee's first year, and then 4 hours of continuing education every 2 years thereafter. So as a note, we are in the process of making changes and updates to the MET rules overall. But the authorization for boards to have their own education policies would allow them to build out and require more robust education requirements should they deem that appropriate for their influence.
May I stop you for a moment, please?
Yes, sir.
Can we talk about posting information online?
Yes, sir.
I'm surprised to hear, I don't doubt it, but I'm surprised to hear that some plans, if I understand you correctly, some plans find it to be a hardship to put all of their documents on their website.
Yes, sir. The maintenance and administration of a website, depending on what tools that the website is currently housed on and used, sometimes is not very user friendly. It's not super intuitive for the average person to use without having prior training. So there, a lot of Telfer funds have little to no staff, and so that expertise isn't already present. They would need to either obtain that themselves or hire somebody who has that ability.
So would this situation satisfy your recommendation, and that is require the pension board to reference the pension review board materials, so that if those materials are sent to the pension review board, they are accessible to users through the pension board's website? They would go to the pension board website and see such and such materials are available in the pension review board, link to the pension review board where those resources are available. Does that satisfy what y'all are recommending?
It would satisfy it if we had all of those documents available online. And that is something we are moving towards. We have the public pension data center already, and we are in the process of working on just continuing that project development and allowing, like, the goal is to have the materials available online. So if the PRB was able to post all of those documents, that would technically satisfy that requirement. I believe there was also just a concern, though, in general about minutes not being accessible and also board meeting material as well. I know from the LBJ school study, I believe it was 19 of the 42 Telfer systems did not have minutes available on their website. So I know that also is a concern, and I apologize to Amy and Tamara. I believe there is a requirement to have minutes that it's not part of the PRB's statute, but part of the overall Texas requirements is to have minutes available online for our reporting. So, sorry, Tamara.
Yeah, so to keep minutes, yes, to have them available, yes.
Okay.
But not necessarily online.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So does everybody support a requirement that pension boards post their minutes, meeting minutes online?
I don't.
You do not.
I don't know.
I don't see why you wouldn't require that.
It's not, I mean, it's not required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. I mean, to the extent that the legislature wanted meeting minutes to be available online, I think that that's a legislative change to the Texas Open Meetings Act that would apply to entities in addition to these pension funds. I mean, it's really an Open Meetings Act request, right? I mean, it's a transparency and applies to entities. In addition to the plans. I mean, I have some clients, you know, that are fairly large local governments, and they don't have their minutes available online. You can request them, you can go in and you can review them. And that's just, you know, they have a formal board book, and that's where they're housed and available. So I think if that's the standard for local governments, I don't necessarily think we should have a higher standard for these pension.
Yeah, I agree with that. Would it be useful in all of this if we said, if we just subjected, and maybe we're already there, are these pension funds subject to the Texas Open Meetings Act as you described?
Yes, sir.
So we're already there. You okay with that?
Yeah. I mean, I do think for the websites, I do think that they have options for websites. I mean, there are a lot of small local governments, whether they're, you know, water districts or some other kind of special utility districts. And for a lot of those districts, they're in a similar situation where they don't have employees of the district. They're basically run by the board with help of consultants, and all of their websites are hosted through their consultants website, whether that's a law firm or some other engineering type entity or system administrator. And so I think that there are options available so that everyone can have an independent website, even if they don't have the sophistication to run it themselves.
Okay, I appreciate that. What do we think about a requirement? This would be a legal requirement that pension boards inform users on their website that everything they've submitted to the PRB is accessible at the PRB website and linked to the PRB. So that users who are looking for documents that have been submitted to the PRB can be relatively easily found.
I'm fine with that.
How about adding, if you wish to see minutes of the board meeting, contact the trust, they're in contact the board. You know, make it obvious that if people want to see board minutes or board packets, they can request that. I have a question on the additional areas. When you say authorize boards to adopt an education policy, are you intending to require them to have some sort of education policy? Or you're just saying they can adopt, but they don't have to?
The original intention with this option was providing, like, authorizing language in statutes that would allow them to have some backbone, so to speak. If they do adopt the policy, they can always refer back to statute showing that they are authorized to do so, but would not require them to do so. And it wouldn't dictate the material necessarily included in the policy.
Excuse me. Finished with top area 3. Transparency, communication, posting on website. Everybody said their piece on that. And you said all you want to say on that? Top area 3, all right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, can we go on to item 4, please?
Under item 4, that was the education policy authorization. We didn't have any other statutory or legislative recommendations we were proposing at this time. However, we were going to propose to create a new course on the role of the PRB and the reporting requirements, as well as creating a process to collect, share, and regularly update example policies and resources. So that was a recommendation from the original document as well, and we do not have any updates to that at this time.
Thank you. Comments on that, members? Okay.
Slide, please. So this slide contains a timeline for the project, and our current stage is in bold. So we will be re-releasing the potential Telford governance issues and recommendations document with the new options following this meeting. As a note, these options are still not final, and the document will be open once again for comment. We encourage all stakeholders to submit their comments to us, and we do take them into consideration as we continue to move forward with this project. So beyond that, the next steps for this project will be presenting those materials at the July board meeting with the committee and stakeholder input. The final recommendations will be presented in September for possible approval, and any approved recommendations would then make it into the PRB biannual report, which is published late November. And that concludes my presentation. I am happy to answer any additional questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Very good. Ms. Lively, did you have something to say? Questions?
I just had a question about this timeline. I mean, it feels like there's still some work that needs to be done, and I'm not quite sure if this is ready to go to the board in July.
I do not disagree.
I would just say that what we're planning to do is send out the current documents for comment, and then bring essentially an update to the July to get further feedback, and then I guess the intention is not for the board to finally approve those recommendations.
I feel like it needs to come back to this committee one more time before it goes to the board. I just don't know if it's kind of baked enough yet to go to the board. But I mean, I'm 1-3, so.
No, I don't disagree. I'd like to continue the conversation. I think there's some unplowed ground here.
On the other hand, if we don't comply with this timeline, we're not going to get it into the biennial. And I think to wait another 2 years to get this into the biennial, I don't think that's, I think there should be something that goes.
It's my intention to just get into that report. And I would just ask staff to work with us to find a time when we can meet. Either push back the July thing or we'll meet before July. Can you all do that? Please, can you bring us together?
We'll try.
But the goal is to get something into the biennial.
For me, it is.
Yes, okay. And I'm good.
Other comments, questions? Okay, I know this was tedious and long. I appreciate everybody's patience. My fellow committee members and the members of the audience, thank you for staying with us. And we've got a little bit more business to do, but I'm going to call it a 10-minute break, please, and we'll come back here in 10 minutes to start with the next agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, like.
Great question.
Ask Mr. Fee to join Ms. Miller at the table for item 7. And who do we get on first? Ms.
That
Miller.
would be me again.
Or Ms. Miller. Please.
All right. So another project we are currently undertaking is an update to the PRB's pension funding guidelines, as well as the guidance for developing a funding policy. This project was also introduced at the last Actuarial Committee meeting, and following that meeting, we opened up the draft guidelines and draft guidance for public comment between February 5th and March 15th. During that time period, we received a total of 6 comments. 3 were from systems, then we also received a comment from 2 cities and an actuarial firm. During this meeting, we wanted to take the time to review some of the stakeholder feedback we received and go over any of the changes we are proposing to the documents. You can find a summary of the feedback behind your presentation in your packet, and the full comments were provided to you as an attachment. Next slide, please. So starting out first with the feedback on the pension funding guidelines. Generally, we received the most comments about guidelines 4, 5, and 6. And as a note, guidelines 5 and 6 were both new additions to this iteration of the guidelines. Overall, a lot of the comments were recommending that the guidelines be less prescriptive and brought up various scenarios or examples for reasons why systems may want to make certain funding choices that would be outside of the updates to the guidelines. Based on that feedback, we will be proposing some changes to those 3 guidelines to help address those concerns, and I will discuss the specific feedback and changes in a moment. Additionally, we received some general feedback about the technical language used in documents. We don't have any major proposed changes there because we are trying to match the language that's used in statute. And then we also received feedback about the scope of the guidelines overall, and we just wanted to note that the guidelines serve to provide guidance to systems and their sponsors. They are not a required policy. There are currently systems who have legacy FSRPs that may not be quite in line with the updates that we are proposing to the guidelines, but those legacy FSRPs are governed by a separate set of rules and statute. We received a comment requesting the PRB considered adding a footnote on guidelines 6 and 7, acknowledging that certain plan sponsors may negotiate their benefits with employees, and we decided not to add any additional footnotes because the guidelines do support those negotiations currently. As far as the guidance for developing the funding policy goes, we received feedback regarding specific examples that we used, either requesting that the examples be removed or modified. We also received some comments that really seem to be a bit more applicable to some of the other projects or policies we are working on, rather than guidance for funding policy specifically. We wanted to keep the guidance a very focused document, specifically to the development of a funding policy. And so in general, we did have several documents out for comment at the same time, so there was a little bit of crossover between comments for developer governance and also comments for the guidelines and guidance. Next slide, please. So as far as specific changes go, the proposed update to guideline 4 would have said, once a system reaches 100% funding or funded, contributions should continue to cover the normal cost. We received feedback that there is a normal cost once full funding is reached, may result in funding over the actuarially determined rate. Staff is suggesting to update the language on guideline 4 to specify that minimum contributions should continue to cover normal costs, but added a 120% funded ratio upper limit to account for instances when the system may opt to fund less than the normal cost while still maintaining strong funding levels. We also received feedback in the section about encouraging the development of a surplus management policy, and the revised guidance for developing a funding policy provides some more information on surplus management policies. On guideline 5, we originally had proposed having 2 different target dates. The intended date for when the system would begin to reduce their unfunded actuarially accrued liability, and then one for the intended date when the system would eliminate that unfunded actuarial accrued liability. We received feedback that there is some concern that changing circumstances may result in shifts to specific dates for the reduction and elimination of the UAL. Based on the feedback we received, we are proposing to update the language on guideline 5, proposing instead that systems target a funded period of 15 years by September 1st, 2040, if their funding period has not decreased to 20 years or less by September 1st, 2035. These new dates allow for systems to have fluctuations in their funding periods year over year in response to various assumptions and circumstance changes, while still remaining on a long-term track towards full funding. This is also in accordance with FSRP requirements and will help systems stay on track to have decreasing funding periods over time. Proposed guideline 6 originally said that benefit increases and contribution decreases should not be adopted if the proposed changes cause a material increase in the funding period, and if the resulting funding period exceeds the average future working lifetime of the current active members. There was concern that this guideline may be a little too restrictive, and we received some comments concerned about the phrasing of material increase, as well as the suggestion to make the maximum acceptable amortization period of 20 years, with a preferable target maximum amortization period not to exceed the average future working lifetimes. PRB staff proposes updating guideline 6 to specify parameters around benefit or contribution changes after September 1st, 2040. We also recommend that systems discuss with their actuary what material increase would look like for them, because this would differ from system to system. So moving on to funding policy guidance. Next slide, please. As noted earlier in the presentation, a lot of the suggestions we received ended up being out of the scope of the current project, but we are keeping them in mind for the future. So, for example, we got a comment that was discussing education requirements and board composition, which fits a little bit more in line with the developer governance project we were recently discussing, and that was actually from a city that has a fund. We received a question asking if the guidance was intended to be for statewide systems as well. So we are going to clarify that statewide systems are exempt from certain funding policy requirements, specifically that requirement to jointly develop and adopt a funding policy with their sponsor. We received a request from a system to remove them as an example, and we want to honor that request, so we did go ahead and remove them from the document. And again, we just wanted to note that overall, this guidance is intended to serve as a starting point for when systems and sponsors are creating their funding policy and offering suggestions for the type of material they may want to include. It's not intended to supersede any FSRP.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
For the request that the system be removed, definitely understand wanting to be sensitive to that, but maybe also be sensitive to the extent that others may be similarly situated, even if they didn't provide comments is there a reason why we have to identify? I mean, are we kind of providing the example and then pointing people to the policy as a whole? Or can we update the language so that we're being a little bit more generalized as we talk about, you know, the systems and the plans, if it's a large city, small city, tougher plan, just can we use more generalized language to describe the plans and include the examples? And would that also give us kind of flexibility to use people who may not want to be specifically identified?
I think that's definitely a possibility. Originally, the reason why we included examples was because there was some confusion when this project was first launched back in about 2019 of how funding policies for fixed rate plans could actually be applied, which we will talk about sample policy in a moment. The original guidance had a lot of examples from outside sources, so other states, and we didn't really have super many options from Texas to select from. So on this new version of the guidance, the reason why we included certain systems was because we just now had examples from nearly all Texas systems. So what we could definitely make it a bit more general if that is the direction we want to go in.
Well, another option, we can check this on the system that we use as examples.
Yeah, I
Even if
mean,
they have-
even if we don't want, I mean, I understand the benefit of that specifically identifying a plan to the extent someone wants to go and review the plan in its totality, but if that's really not what we're expecting people to do, I don't know what other benefit comes from identifying the plan. And again, you know, to the extent that we felt like the system had a good example that we wanted to include, could we still use that example, but just take out the city itself as an identifying factor and generally describe the system for the reader, but still include the example if we feel like it's beneficial.
I agree with removing references to specific plans. Those that
I'm a good one.
Okay, thank you. With that, we can move to the next slide, please. At the last actuarial committee meeting, we mentioned that we would have an update to the sample funding policy at this time. When the funding policy requirements were first established, as I mentioned before, there was a bit of uncertainty about how funding policies could even be applied to fixed rate plans. So staff created a sample policy. This sample policy may not contain all of the components that are applicable for each system, and it's not necessarily intended to state what should be in a funding policy, just showing what could be. So we did put some updates into our sample funding policy. Specifically, we updated the technical language surrounding the statutory changes. And we also added a 2-year periodic review of the policy. We added a surplus management policy, and then we also added 2 signature lines at the end of the policy, one for the system official and one for the city official to sign. Next slide, please. So this slide contains a status update on where we currently are with this project. As you can see in bold, we currently have updated the materials based on feedback from stakeholders. And we have created a sample policy based on the updated funding policy guidance and pension funding guidelines. Next up, we're going to release this for comments again, and we will present the final draft for possible approval in July. That concludes my presentation. Mr. Feeney and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, members, you may have noticed that unlike the previous item, this item is not a force law, states are still interesting and valuable, but not quite as serious. Questions or comments about what's been proposed here by staff? With the exception of the removal of the specific references to specific cities, are you all comfortable with where we are on this? Ms. Levy?
Yeah, I'm happy with where we are in this. I remember when we did this policy originally, and the time and effort and communications that went into it, and I think this is, you know, further refined. It's beneficial. And I'm happy with the final work product.
I agree with that. I think this is good progress, and I hope that pension plans find it to be useful, and their plan sponsors. Anybody in the audience wish to share their thoughts? Is everybody comfortable with where we're going on this? Anybody not get what they wanted in this? Feel strongly about it? Now's your chance. Going once, twice, 3 times, okay? Thank you.
I do have a
Please.
question that is almost unrelated. You seem to remember that there's also something that's a benefits policy, benefit design policy. And I wonder, again, I know before the biennial, there's no time. But maybe we ought to just, again, take a look at that benefits policy now that we've updated funding policy and funding guidelines. Maybe look at the benefit. Kind of put that on a to-do list.
Are you thinking that's something that would go into the biennial?
No,
Or
no,
is that-
no, no.
Okay.
I fully accept that.
Okay.
Going to the biennial, we've got a full.
Thank you. You all good with that? Okay, thank you very much. On to item 8, draft guidance for calculating and administering lump sums. This is something that we've seen 2 or 3 times. And each time it has been accompanied by our esteemed staff actuary, Mr. Fee, and here he is. Mr. Fee, the floor is yours.
I'm Dean Fee, staff actuary, here represents our lump sum. So today we'll talk about why we are drafting lump sum guidance, why actual equivalence is especially important for lump sum calculations, how to keep assumptions reasonable over time, administrative practices to better inform members and their spouses, and next steps. So the purpose of this lump sum guidance is to inform and remind pension systems. So most plan provisions are updated only when the plan sponsor is looking to change the benefit formula. So it's important to remind these sponsors that actual equivalence provisions are like modern appliances. They're only meant to last so long, they need to be updated regularly. We also want to provide reasonable suggestions and principles for sponsors to consider. By providing these suggestions, we will help fulfill the PRB's duty to encourage an equitable distribution of benefits. So actual equivalence, there's 2 components, an interest rate and a mortality table. They affect all optional forms of payment, but lump sums especially. That's because lump sums are paid far in advance of other payment forms, where you're trading a lifetime of future payments for one single upfront payment. And both the interest and mortality effects are inflated the farther that payment timing is moved from the original date. So if we were just moving a payment for 1 year, say someone's owed a payment of $99 a year from now, using a 10% interest rate, we would pay them a lump sum of $90 today. And if we change that interest rate by 1%, that $90 lump sum would only change by 1%. But if we're moving a payment 20 years, then instead of a 1% difference for a 1% change in the interest rate, you would have a 20% difference. And that's just for the interest rate component. It gets further inflated with mortality. So both the interest and mortality can become outdated if they're not reviewed and updated regularly. So when it comes to mortality, we have one Texas public pension system that uses a table from 1971 when Joy to the World was the #1 hit for it. The most common table is from 1984 when Dove's Cry was. But when it comes to their actuarial valuations, these same systems use mortality tables that were. So when it comes to reasonable assumptions are important for both the pension system and the members. So when the optional form conversion uses reasonable assumptions, whether or not a lump sum is chosen, we know the pension system will not incur gains or losses, and the member will receive a benefit that's arguably equal in value to the normal form of payment. Now, there's no agreed upon definition of what reasonable actual equivalence is. So this guidance would provide potential definitions of what a reasonable interest rate and reasonable mortality is. So, next slide. For the systems we see, using 8% interest rates to calculate lump sums, that was likely their expected return when the plan provisions were first created. So the goal at that time would have been to set the rate such that the system's finances would be unaffected by choice. So we know that when actual assumptions approximate the system's future experience, the system will not incur gains or losses. Likewise, when the actual assumptions approximate the member's future experience, the members will not experience a gain or loss from interest. So the next slide, reasonable interest rate. A reasonable interest rate would then be no higher than the system's best estimate of their future investment returns that they use in their actual evaluation. Because at that rate, the system's finances are fully insulated from the member's benefit choice. There's really no reason to go higher. Now, the system could choose an interest rate below their best estimate of future returns. In that situation, we would encourage them to make sure they understand the cost of what those various options will be to the system at the Now, when it comes to updating mortality tables, what we're really interested in is how often they're updated. So there's new widely adopted mortality tables. They typically come out every 10 years. So pension systems should review and consider this at least once a decade. Because we know retiree expected lifetimes grow over time. And an outdated mortality table is going to then underestimate the number of pension payments that are in the normal form annuity. And when that is underestimated, it's going to result in a smaller lump sum. Now, for administrative practices, when members choose from all the various optional forms at the time of retirement, this is one of the toughest, most important decisions that prospective retiree will ever make. They can choose a normal form that covers their spouse, or they can choose a larger monthly annuity that does not cover their spouse, or they can choose a much larger single lump sum payment. And that decision is greatly impacted by the information that's received by the member and their spouse. So two topics that we'll be talking about are disclosure of relative values and spousal consent. We'll talk about them more on the following slides. So when it comes to relative values, the system should consider including some or all of the following in the optional forms of election paperwork. One is very simple, just disclose the interest rate and mortality assumptions that were used to calculate the option. Second is the statement that the various options may not be of equal value. And then third, for systems that are not using interest rate and mortality assumptions that are substantially close to their actual evaluation, they should consider disclosing the relative value of each of the options that are being shown. So if using their best estimate assumptions, a lump sum is only worth 80% of the normal form annuity, they should consider disclosing that 80%. Now, when it comes to spouse approval, for any payment form that does not include payments that continue the spouse after the member's death, the best practice is to require the spouse's signature for acknowledgement and approval of the member's choice. So if not required, the spouse may never be informed that they are not covered after the member's death. And as an example, ERS per Texas Administrative Code requires spousal consent for these payments, as do most of the systems that offer complete lump sum. So this is already something most of the systems are doing, but they're So for next steps, we would incorporate any committee input, invite stakeholder comments, and incorporate any feedback, and then we present to the full board at July 25th for us.
Thank you. I think this is all about transparency and communication at this point. Anybody on the committee have comments, suggestions?
And this is guidance, correct? Because what we're talking about is providing guidance to the systems.
Yes, this is not a requirement. We're trying to fill a gap of information.
So, yeah, I think it's good stuff, and it's stuff that's been, in corporate plans for 40 more years, 50 years.
Yeah.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Please.
Because I know I probably more than anyone have struggled with some of this. The spousal consent, why are we recommending spousal consent only in the event that payments don't include or don't continue until after death and not just for the option of taking lump sum?
So, there typically be maybe 5 options that the member will have in front of them. And say 2 of them may cover the spouse after participant death. Say one of them maybe get 50% of the payment would continue after the participant's death, and the spouse is still alive. Another option may be 100%. Another option might be just for the life only of the participant. So once the participant passes, no money goes toward the spouse. And then another would be the lump sum. So and what is typically done is that the spousal consent is required for that life only form and for the lump sum form, but not for the 2 joint assumptions that I provided as examples. Because whether it's 100% or 50%, the 50% is what's generally required as the normal form, and the 100% is better than that. So generally there wouldn't be, usually most people don't see a reason to have the spouse consent to that, because they're either getting what is required for the normal form or something better. So it's really where the options where they're not covered that we're really focused on.
I don't know if I followed all of that.
We're suggesting there be spousal consent in cases where the spouse may be adversely affected.
Right. So if the participant were to elect the normal form and not some other form, the spouse would already be provided for it at probably at 50%. So there's no need for them to. There's thought that there's no need for them to consent to it because they're already getting what that normal form is. It's when the member goes away from that normal form in a way that's worse for the spouse.
We're trying to help people avoid nasty surprises.
David, is there a requirement that the normal form be the JNS joint survivor 50%? Are there plans that just have a normal form of life only?
I don't believe any of our systems that offer lump sums. Do you believe we have some software systems that may only provide a life only, something like that? But they're not the ones that are offering these complete lump sum captions.
I guess what I'm struggling with, is, basically Texas community property state. And so the spouse has an interest in the pension fund. And so why wouldn't spousal consent be required for anything other than a normal payout?
What is your concern for, say, a spouse needing to sign off on something that's better than what they would have already been provided for?
Something better than.
I think we're suggesting they consent to anything where they are getting something worse than what the normal form would be.
Right, but what if they want something different? Just because it's financially better or financially more beneficial may not necessarily mean that that's what the spouse wants. And if the spouse has an interest in that pension plan, because of community property rights, and there's a change, then why wouldn't spousal consent be required in all instances?
You could. It's generally not what's been done. So what we're starting from here is what's generally been done. It's what corporate plans do. It's what most of these other systems that provide complete lump sum cash outs are already doing, but some are not doing. And so we're not trying to create guidance that creates something more than what is generally done.
Okay.
We could, but that's not where we started.
Okay.
Other comments, questions?
Yeah, my other comment is, and I know you and I have talked about this, and I do appreciate all of the all the time you spent working with me on this and working through my comments. The reasonable interest rate. Is there a reason why we couldn't just say, or we wouldn't just say that the interest rate just should be the interest rate that they use for future investment returns on their AB? I mean, we say that it should be no higher, but that they can choose to go lower, but if they choose to go lower, then I think that's maybe more beneficial to the member, less beneficial to the plan, but at the same time, it could also impose additional funding requirements on people who haven't cashed out of the
Well, one is to just try and avoid being too prescriptive.
plan.
One is that the member's expected return may be less than the system's professional managed portfolio's expected return. Another is just, again, referencing what is generally done. We already have some systems that offer rates lower than their expected return. Corporate plans pay lump sums at corporate bond yields, high quality corporate bond yields, which were close to 0% for pretty recent years in recent memory. So we're not trying to be more prescriptive than what's generally been done. We're just trying to avoid, the outlying cases.
But Stephanie, if you link them directly to the valuation returns, the valuation assumptions could change annually and anytime there's a valuation. And to reconstruct all of the factors to determine the alternative forms would be a burden. So again, I think the requirement to, look at them at least once every 10 years, maybe more often, but to link it directly to the interest rate would require that perhaps people would have to do it very often. And it's a big job, especially if you have a 50% joint survivor, 100% joint survivor lump sum, and maybe other, 25% joint survivor. I mean, there's a lot of work and a lot of tables that go with that.
I don't think it's, so much work. I mean, I think they're either on an automated system that can do it lickety split, or they have an actuary that provides them a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet just has an input set up for what that interest rate is that they can change. I mean, they would have to check. There would be, a few hours of work because they'd have to check and make sure it worked. But it really wouldn't be that.
No, my age is shown.
Really, we're just trying to prevent cases of egregious unfairness.
Correct.
Other comments or suggestions? I want to commend the staff for their work on this, for spotting this. I think that it is a potential injustice that is in this system, whether it's intentional or not. And at a minimum, I think people should be aware of it. And I think that that's the direction we're heading, and I appreciate all the work that's done on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, the next actuarial committee meeting is TBD. Maybe sooner than the next pension review board meeting will take place July 25th, 10 a.m. Location TBD. And if there is no further business and no objection, I move to adjourn this meeting.
Maybe before we adjourn, just to reiterate March's prior discussions and it's in the minutes for the call for future either agenda items. I mean, that new policy or
the fact that we've done a lot of talk about, my concern on the normal costs for, especially for plans that are invoking tiers of benefits. I think maybe it's worthwhile looking at that benefits policy, because perhaps there's something in there that we should look at, not just from the funding side, the actuarial side of what's the normal cost, but kind of looking at it from the benefits side.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you, Ms. Libby. Thank you, Ms. Dush. And we are adjourned.